And the minute I stepped foot on Spelman's campus, I was like, I have arrived. What they are doing is instilling the confidence and the boldness and the discipline and professionalism and rigor that you need so that when you go out into the world and you are the minority amongst the majority, unequivocally, you deserve to be where you are.
That was Tiffany Munsell, Senior Vice President of Mature Engine Programs at Rolls-Royce, talking about her authentic ascension to leadership of people in the aerospace industry. And this is IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. So, Tiffany, we're so excited to welcome you to this 2025 Women's History Month episode of the Freedom Forum. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
You are one of the most unique women professionals I know in this city with more degrees and credentials than most. I'm super excited to learn about your historical and impressive career path. But before we get started, will you tell our listeners a bit about you, your educational and professional background, and any other factors that have led to you becoming the Senior Vice President of Mature Engine Programs at Rolls-Royce?
Yeah, thank you. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So a little bit about background about me. I'm actually born and raised here in Indianapolis, Indiana, which a lot of professionals are from all over. So it's very rare to meet somebody still in the city working here in Indianapolis, though I have also lived all over, but I keep finding my way back home is the way I say it. So yeah, born and raised here in Indianapolis, Indiana, went to undergrad at Spelman College. I knew from age 10, that's where I wanted to be. My parents tried to persuade me to go to Purdue, but I had it relentlessly that I was going to be at Spelman. And so when that time came, spent 4 years at Spelman College and then came back to Indiana, went to Indiana University McKinney School of Law for law school and thought I was going to be a lawyer. And for the most part of my early career, that is what I was actively acting as a lawyer. It was an interesting time because it was right around the time of the 2008 recession when I finished school. And so it was complicated in terms of trying to think about whether or not you go to firm life or work inside of a company in terms of practicing law. A lot of lawyers were getting laid off at the time. And so that pretty much dictated what my career path went, because originally my intent was to work at a firm in the financial institutions practice group when all the big banks bought up the little banks because there wasn't enough money to go around for all the banks. Essentially, it redirected my career path. And at the time, I was working at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, essentially working on state tax incentives with companies throughout the state of Indiana that were looking to expand or come to Indiana to call themselves home. But I got an exciting opportunity to switch from that aspect to work full time with the 21st Century Research and Technology Fund, which at that time was the state's venture capital fund, if you will. It was state-funded dollars that would invest in companies throughout the state of Indiana. At that time, we realized we needed to pull that out of state-ran government entity governance and instead decided we needed a private entity to govern that money and also attract more private dollars along with that money to be able to create the type of churn that we wanted. Keep in mind, post-2008 recession, the way to create jobs was to invest as much money as you could into small businesses and startups to help create that churn. So jobs was the comment at that time, and that's what we were using that fund to do. And so a group of us that were at the 21st Century Research and Technology Fund co-founded Elevate Ventures, which still exists today as a private equity firm that invests in technology and startups all across the state of Indiana, played a critical role in creating the startup activity that you see in Indiana today. It was my job to, one, do all the governance of formation of that entity as a young lawyer trying to figure out my way in life. Right. Also attract both federal, state, and private dollars to develop that fund. And so that's what I did. And so my career completely went to the left, high and left, in terms of getting into the economic development space, getting into the private equity space, understanding venture capital, understanding startups. And from there, I got tapped by the mayor of New Orleans to come do the same thing post-Katrina to try to create that type of churn in the city of New Orleans as they were looking to recovery to instill more startup activity there. So I went and worked for the New Orleans Business Alliance and did the same type of activity there. And then I went to the East Coast and did that same type of activity in Philadelphia, South Jersey, and Delaware. So my career took me all around in that space. And I thought that was going to be my career for the rest of my career, to be quite frank. I love the work. I love that it mixed both the business, financial aspect of my interests with also my legal aspect. I felt like I created a niche market for myself. There weren't a lot of young professionals doing what I was doing, and I was really excited to do it. But also balancing with that, I had my personal life. And at that time, I was going through a divorce and I had a small child, and I was on the East Coast away from all family that we knew and loved. And so we found our way back home to Indianapolis, my daughter and I. And I had to figure out what I wanted to do because I'm now back to where I started. The network at the law school was really great. I went to them and said, hey, basically need to figure out a new career path. Do you have any guidance or feedback in terms of what I could do? Here's what I've been doing. And I got some great leads, clerkships, more traditional legal experiences. And then I was introduced to Rolls-Royce as an opportunity. So when I first started at Rolls-Royce, I started off in their in their general counsel practice group,
Yeah.
in their what we call commercial because it's a British company, but essentially their contracts team, and then also government relations attorney. So I was doing government relations for the state of Indiana for Rolls-Royce, and then also managing a book of business from a contracts perspective. So I had global contracts all across the globe, across multiple platform. And that was my job. And I loved it. It was different to go into a business because I had worked on the periphery of supporting businesses. So that was the first time I had worked inside of a business,
Right.
actually a large scale corporation.
Right.
And I was doing really well. I was getting promoted quickly, but there was a ceiling in the general counsel function. Essentially, your assistant counsel, and that's it, right? Like those are the only two options. And I felt like my growth trajectory was one where I wanted to grow faster than maybe that career path would have led me. And so someone asked me, would I be interested in considering moving to another part of the business and just learning the business, not necessarily in law or in the commercial contracts team. And at first I was worried. I was like, I don't know about that because my identity was entrenched in this legal profession that I had created. I worked hard. I was barred in multiple states, and anybody who knows who's taken a bar knows how hard it is just to pass one bar, and I had to take three. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready to give up that identity, but I also knew I wanted to grow. And so I shifted into the business, went and learned a global procurement team, then transitioned to become the chief of staff to our president and CEO of Rolls-Royce North America, and then transitioned to leading a business team of a business division, business unit of my own in our which is now our U.S. Mature Engines Group team. So it has definitely served me well to take those chances, take those risks, but by no means am I on the career trajectory that I originally set
Right.
out on when I graduated Spelman College.
That is a fascinating career path, and there's so many things you said there, but a couple things that I really picked up on, key factors, decision-making factors. The 2008 recession for you was a deciding point in figuring out what else to do besides legal. That same time period is when I decided to go to law school, so that's very interesting to me. And then your whole conversation about the fact that you had decided early on when you were a child that you were going to go to Spelman. And I want to talk about that because I too, my mom tells me how when I was younger, I was all about going to Spelman and then things changed. You actually did that. And I know that being in any HBCU, because we've had several people who've been on HBCUs on the show and talk about how unique of an experience that is, how important it was for their career foundation, their confidence, all the things, like so many things that HBCUs really give their grads. And I think it's also well known that HBCUs have historically been discounted and dismissed on the value they truly bring to specifically African American and Black professionals and how they really give a unique experience that you just don't get in every university, particularly predominantly white universities or PWIs. And so I want you to talk about what was your experience at Spelman that you still rely on today? What is it that we've seen since George Floyd's murder in particular? There's been a kind of a shift in the narrative. HBCUs have gotten a lot more funding. They've gotten a lot more visibility. They've gotten a lot more just appreciation for how many famous, important, impactful people have actually come from HBCUs. But that wasn't the deal for a very long time. And clearly you went there long before any of that happened. So tell me how you got there. Why had you decided to go to Spelman? Why did you actually go through with that? And then what did Spelman give you that you believe you couldn't have necessarily gotten at going to any other university?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So when I first stepped foot, I was in drill team when I was in middle school, and we would go and perform at various cities and various events throughout the city. Our drill team coach, she was also my English teacher, and she invested a lot in me academically, but then also through the drill team experience, taught me rhythm because it's a misconception that all Black people have rhythm. I did not. So thank goodness for Mrs. Brown because otherwise I would not have it. But also taught me discipline, the importance of being on time, the importance of being prepared, the importance of confidence in myself and my voice and my movement, how I showed up, how I looked. Our uniforms were to a T. If your ascot was remotely off, she's getting you in check, right? So there was a lot that came through that process. And part of the reward of that level of discipline and rigor was that we got to go tour different cities and perform. And so we got to tour what is called the Atlantic University Center, which has a consortium of HBCUs attached to it. And the minute I stepped foot on Spelman's campus, I was like, I have arrived.
Yeah.
This is my place. I saw all these beautiful Black women from all walks of life walking the campus, very academic, very astute, but very just down to earth. And it felt like a place that I had never seen before and a place that I knew I just had to be at some point in my life. And despite getting full rides to other schools, despite financially it making sense for me to be in other institutions, my heart told me that's where I needed to be. And I was willing to sacrifice whatever it looked like to get there, even if it meant paying a little bit more, taking out student loans, if we're really being honest about how I got to Spelman. And it was worth the sacrifice for me. As far as my experience, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I absolutely loved my experience there. What I got, there's so many things. I can't even just put it in nuggets. I always say that Spelman partially made me who I am today, for sure. I feel that way. But there were so many nuggets. Probably the first, and I heard Chadwick Boseman say this when he talked about his experience at Howard, and I thought that was a well said verse. It was the first time I had seen so much diversity in an all Black environment because
Yeah, that's
typically
right.
speaking, outside of your family, you don't really get in environments where you are the majority.
Yeah.
And so to be in that and get to celebrate all the diversity that exists in the Black culture was very instrumental to me because I got to see Black women from families of all walks of life that lived all kinds of places. Alaska, I
Right.
didn't know Black people lived in
Right.
Alaska when I got to Spelman, and to hear their experiences, all different social economic status, all different parents with there were lots of alumni children there, what we call legacy children there, who third, fourth generation college kids. And I'm like, what? Your great grandma went to
Right.
college? It
Right.
was just
Right.
a beautiful thing to see. And so that for sure was a pivotal moment for me. But also, one of the misconceptions I think at HBCUs is that they say that's not reality because nowhere else are you going to find that environment. And so they're falsely teaching you how to live in a fantasy world. And that's not true. What they are doing is instilling the confidence and the boldness and the discipline and professionalism and rigor that you need so that when you go out into the world and you are the minority amongst the majority, unequivocally, you deserve to be where you are. And
Yeah.
that confidence that is instilled with you is priceless because I go around peers who did not go to HBCUs that did not get that same thing instilled. And it takes years and years of being beaten up and mentored and coached and built back up before they walk with that level of confidence that Spelman instilled in me with the 4 years that I attended there. And I would say that if anything, from an HBCU perspective, that is one of the biggest achievements that I think that they do really well. You know you're ready to go when you
Yeah.
when you graduate.
That is awesome. And that there could be no better commercial for HBCUs than that, because that's what I hear over and over, what they do beyond just the academics. They give you the confidence to go out in any environment, know you belong, know you add value, know you earned it. And I think particularly in the climate we're in now, that is critically important. So I want to talk about you talked about you graduated Spelman and then you really started off in this kind of startup venture capital world, right? On the finance side of things, where you spent a lot of your career. I was really fascinated in learning about your career. Again, just things, it's easy for me to relate it back to myself. You went from Spelman and got your JD, went to McKinney and got your law degree. And then decided, you know what, I'm going to pivot from the legal side of things and go focus on the business. So then got an MBA and focused on the business. I, again, did the opposite, went to undergrad, got my master's, and then went to law school. And was like, that's it. That's all the degrees I'm ever getting in my life. I'm done. So I'm really fascinated, number one, that you still had the wherewithal after law school to go back and get another degree, because that's impressive. But just seeing the gaps in your learning such that it was warranted and you were willing to go back to get your MBA? Tell us about that and what did you see in your career trajectory that you felt like getting an MBA could really fill that you didn't have already?
Yeah, that's really great. And I will say that wherewithal to go through school again, I will tell you the MBA, while the curriculum wasn't the most difficult, where I was in my phase of life, it was
Yeah.
definitely my most difficult degree to obtain between balancing a very rigorous workload in terms of my career and then also a young child at the same time. It was like, oh Lord, how are we going to do this? I don't want to do another homework assignment, another test, write another paper, another group project. Who has time for a group project? You good and grown, and I'm
Yeah.
talking about a group project, trying to figure out when we all gonna get together on the weekend. So, it was definitely a challenging time in terms of balancing mentally where I was with the curriculum, but the thing I love about an MBA is you can make it what you want, right? You can get out of it what you want, and the gap that I felt like I needed and the reason why I went back to get my MBA was twofold. One, I knew I wanted to lead a business unit of my own, so that profit and loss element of my role was really critical, and the ability to be able to navigate that with confidence was important to me. So I really leaned in on the finance aspect of my MBA. And law school teaches you a lot of things, but it is not going to teach you how to manage a business from a profit and loss perspective. That's something you're either going to have to learn on your own or go get more formal training on. So that was a critical aspect of my MBA. The second was leadership. I knew I didn't want to just micromanage or manage individuals, but I wanted to lead large scale groups of teams. And for me at Rolls, it's a global team. So even more so being a strong leader because you're managing across multiple time zones, multiple culture base, and really trying to navigate your way through different people's perspectives. And I really leaned into my ability to be a high performing, highly effective leader and to get the most out of my team, which took a lot of vulnerability on me because I had to acknowledge some weaknesses that I had in terms of my leadership ability in order to work on and develop and strengthen that element so that I could lean into that through my MBA curriculum and then ultimately practice it, as you will, in my profession.
Yeah. So I want to talk about you mentioned having a daughter, and I too was a mother when I went to law school. I wasn't a single mother, but a mother nonetheless, and balance and all the things, right? And I want you to speak to two things about that because we were clearly both non traditional students, and those are not things that always come through on a resume, right? You've got all the credentials and all the degrees, and you've had all the titles, but there is a level of grit that I always talk about is some intangibles, right? Going and getting several degrees is hard, period, dot, dot. It's even harder when you've got all these other responsibilities and you're managing time and you're balancing being at the basketball game and cheerleading practice and doing your group project for whatever degree you're currently seeking. Will you talk about two things? Grit and how that has played a role in your career advancement over your career, and also having access, because I know either for law school or your MBA or maybe both, you went to night school or a hybrid program. Having that access, particularly for non-traditional students like me and you, who would have otherwise not necessarily been able to have access to a career program, balancing a family and kids and work and all the things. Will you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say the non-tangibles, I would love intangibles, I would love to talk about that because I actually seek that, right? Like, I wanna see a person beyond the page of the resume because the resumes can look really nice and glossy, but how do you interact with others? How do you lead when forced with pressure? How do you manage time effectively? How do you communicate with others? Those kinds of things don't necessarily spell out on a resume, but having those additional responsibilities or showcasing where you might have been a community leader in some community-based or organization that you're associated with, or you have young kids at home and you're having to manage a family, or even if it's a spouse, right? People who have spouses and having to manage dynamics between multiple relationships, or you moved around a lot as a child and having to learn how to create your own social environments and be a self-starter in new communities when faced with lots of change. Those kinds of things speak volumes and can really
Absolutely.
tell you what a person is capable of, which is why having access and going beyond just the resume, but getting in front of people and being able to have those interview opportunities or network opportunities beyond just just submitting a resume through a portal is really critical to help identify a diversity of talent and making sure you're getting the best and the brightest. So I totally can relate to that, and that will say that I think that comes out. And in fact, it comes out so much with me that people are amazed at all I've done. I present younger than I am, so that also can be somewhat of a misnomer because people think I'm younger than what I am. But when they think about all that I've done, either professionally or then also with balancing my daughter in life, they're just like, how do you have the time? And I don't know. That grit is you just keep pushing on. You figure it out. You
Yeah.
figure it out until you make it. And I respect all the working parents that are having to figure it out, work, being a rock star at their role, but also knocking out the part at home. That mom guilt is very real. There have been lots of times where I felt like I didn't get that balance right. Might be too much on the home side and then didn't come as prepared as I would have liked on the work front. Most times it's I'm very well prepared professionally, and then my daughter's looking at me like, "But mommy, you weren't here for this," and she makes me feel like I'm the worst person ever. And I know she loves me, but my mom keeps telling me that when she's 40, she's not going to feel the same
Yeah.
way. But at age 10, when you feel like you've disappointed your child, that's a lot and can take a toll on you. I would also say that I made a lot of career changes or career decisions based on what's in the best interest of my family, what's in
Yeah.
the best interest of my daughter. The reason why we're staying put here in Indiana now is because she needs to finish high school. And so I get opportunities all the time of, are you considering relocating even within my own company to relocate to other places for career advancement? And for me, it's no. That stability is the most important thing. So I think that grit and that determination and those intangibles really truly define the well-rounded person that you're looking for in an organization, and it's definitely served me well in terms of my own professional success. As it pertains to access, I 100%, both law school and MBA, I was a non-traditional student, had to work, couldn't have done it if I couldn't have worked because I had to take care of the household. I had a child in both environments. I actually had my daughter while I was in law school. When I was in law school, I was married at the time, so I did have help and I had family help, but it was still hard. There were days I remember, this is probably too much information, but I remember just trying to figure out how I'm going to produce milk while I'm in between classes, right? That was so difficult for me, stressed out, trying to figure out how can I
Yeah.
make that happen? Trying to figure out, do I want my child to go to daycare as an infant and be around all kinds of diseases, et cetera. Luckily, we had some close family friends that kept her for the 2 days that I was in class, and then the rest of the days she was with me. I'm studying with for final exams with her on my hip. That's
Yeah.
just how it was. So that accessibility was huge. If I did not have that flexibility, then we didn't have online in law school, but we did have a hybrid. So I was only in class for part of the day or part of a few days a week. By that time, I had went to full day, but a few days a week, and then worked the other days. My MBA the same way. I was on the road sometimes, not even able to physically be in Indiana, and tying in. I'm in the UK, tying in on US time zone, trying to connect to an online class. But my professors were very supportive. My classmates were very supportive. We all came from a similar circumstance where everybody had jobs. That's part of the IU Kelly in Indianapolis, is that everybody does work. So everybody is accepting and flexible with each other's work schedules. And that really served me well. But I would not have been able to get my MBA or my law degree if that flexibility didn't exist. And so I do think that accessibility is critical in order to make sure that people of all walks of life with all types of backgrounds and experiences are able to continue to learn and grow and advance their professional career.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And it's something that has been my journey. And I've talked about it in the context of my experience, but I don't know that many people. That's why we're non traditionalists, because there's not a lot of people. There's a good number, but the standard number of lawyers went typical 3 years law school coming straight out of undergrad. And so I think it is important because just that shows a level of grit and tenacity and professionalism that, again, may not show on the paper. It gets beyond what the degrees and the years and et cetera, but really speaks to who you are as a person and who you are as a leader. Everybody cannot do that and do it well. And I also want to speak to the mom guilt and the showing up more professionally than you did at home and vice versa. I think we all have those times where you're like, oh man, or you missed this, you thought it was this day. I've certainly lived that. Thought a game was on one day and it was on another day or whatever. Like that stuff is real. And you do have guilt about that, particularly when many of us high functioning professionals, lawyers, etc. It's all about doing all the things, doing everything as excellently as possible. And yeah, when you miss the mark here or there, that does, it stays with you. You got to, but I will agree with your mom. They don't worry about that too long. When they 20 and 21 and appreciating all the benefits of your sacrifice, they're a little more comfortable with the fact that you missed a dance routine here or there. So I will tell you that. Now it's time for a break.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back with Tiffany Munsell, Senior Vice President of Mature Engine Programs at Rolls-Royce, on this 2025 Women's History Month episode of the Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. But I want to talk about, now that we've gotten to how you got to Rolls-Royce, I want to talk about your career there, because even there you have transitioned and advanced and not had just a specific linear path, but done many different things. You talked about making the transition from that entrepreneurial venture capital world to a major corporation. That was the first time you had been like within a major corporation or business and learning the business and all about that. Now, I want you to tell us a bit about Rolls-Royce. People know Rolls as cars and whatever, right? But I appreciate now, and that's only since I've been in law, that Rolls has this whole aerospace function, right? Airplanes, aerospace, all the things. So tell us about your roles there, what you did as a leader at the different positions, whether it was the chief of staff, program director, or now your current role as senior vice president. Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, thank you. So it's funny because I knew about Rolls-Royce pretty much all my time here in Indiana because I knew that it was here, but I always thought it was auto as
Yeah,
well.
yeah,
It wasn't until I worked at the Indiana Economic Development Corporation that I realized, wait a second, it's aerospace.
yeah.
So for all of you all listening, Rolls-Royce is aerospace. And I should just say, disclaimer, the lawyer in me has to do this. I am not speaking out on behalf of Rolls-Royce. I'm speaking out on behalf of Tiffany Munsell, but I'm sure that they'll be more than happy with me sharing that we are in aerospace. We have a plant, a manufacturing plant here in Indianapolis on the south side, and we make aerospace engines both for our commercial civil market, small aviation jets here in Indianapolis, as well as our defense market. So defense platform all around the world for the US DoD, as well as other places in the UK, as well as other places in Europe. We provide the engines for those platforms. We also have a power systems division where we provide energy for power plants and large ships, etc. So we essentially are a power propulsion company. That is what we do. We no longer even have an automotive arm of our business that was sold off to BMW in the 90s. How Rolls-Royce came to the United States and specifically Indianapolis is it procured the the Allison Engine Company, which made defense engines here in Indianapolis. And they procured that in the 90s and essentially rebranded everything under the Rolls-Royce umbrella ever since. So people who are aware of Allison know the Allison brand, but don't know that Rolls-Royce acquired the Allison engine brand, and we are in the aerospace industry. I talked quite a bit about starting off in the general counsel function in the contracts team, as well as on the government relations side for Indiana. Then I transitioned into the procurement team, and that team was technically based out of the UK. So I had most of my team in the UK, some people here in Indianapolis, and we had a supply chain base all around the world. We did strategic supply, which essentially is if we're trying to stand up a new engine platform, we needed to source that new engine platform. And so we set the procurement strategy for how we would source that and negotiated contracts, not only just for those individual parts, but also for the long tail aftermarket sustainment for those parts. And then from there, I was tapped to move to DC, which is in Reston, Virginia, is where our headquarters is located for North America, and be the chief of staff to our president of defense and CEO of Rolls-Royce North America. And it was ironic timing. I literally moved to DC 2 weeks before COVID shut down, which is not ideal. It was an awkward time because we moved. My daughter only got to go to school 8 days and then never went to school again the entire time we were at DC. From a mental wellness perspective, she did not navigate that very well, which made it very difficult on a personal front. But professionally is probably my largest growth opportunity because not only was I sitting right next to the CEO of Rolls-Royce North America, our president of our business division, and learning from him day in, day out, getting visibility to essentially everything he got visibility to, we were also in the middle of probably the most difficult business continuity crisis our company had ever faced, because essentially how we make money is if airplanes fly, we get paid. If they don't, we don't. And at that time, no one wanted to go anywhere. And so as a result, our company was really in a volatile place. We were really struggling financially. Supply chains were cut off for all different reasons. And so it was a very difficult time to navigate. And I got to be an active participant, not just someone watching, but an
Right.
active participant during that time, trying to figure out how we were going to navigate our company through that difficult turmoil. And it really stretched me professionally in terms of my thinking, my risk mitigation. I think all lawyers automatically think about risk mitigation, but there's a certain level of risk tolerance that you have to take in order to navigate through some very difficult decisions, even things like health and safety of our employees. Should we
Sure.
come to the office? Should we not? And having to make those kinds of decisions. I was the accountable person over our DC office, so I was the one making the call as to whether or not people were coming in or not, and making sure we were keeping people safe. There were all kinds of things that I was learning as we were going through that process. And I was really supportive of my boss at the time. He was pretty much free reign. Like, you can have access to anything I have access to. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity because it really did stretch me. It also stretched me on a personal level because I had to be transparent with what was going on in my personal life,
Right.
because all of a sudden the camera is in my house, right? Like, people can see what's going on. My daughter wasn't doing well. I'm having to pause to make her lunch in the middle of the day. There were times she's supposed to be online on her virtual class and she's like in the bathroom playing video games, and I'm having to pause meetings to figure out what's going on. And that was the first time ever in my profession that I brought my personal life
Yeah.
into my professional world. And I felt very uncomfortable
Yeah.
about it. I was raised that the two should never coexist, right?
Right.
They should always be separate. And I had to be transparent about what was going on, be very vulnerable about what's going on, even making the decision to move back from DC to Indianapolis so that my daughter could be in a better space, and having to say that out loud to someone and
Yeah.
hope that they would be supportive and understanding was a very difficult shift for me. But it grew me so much as a leader and helped me to be a much more vulnerable and authentic person in how I lead people, that I feel like it was what I needed to make that next step to truly be a high performing leader and lead teams and create that relationship and rapport with my teams that really unlocked our full potential cohesively. So I got so much out of my journey, but it wasn't an easy one, right? It definitely was a difficult one. So when I did decide to move back to Indianapolis, that's when I pivoted and was given the opportunity to lead a business unit. So originally I had our legacy engines, meaning engines that are no longer in production, but we still support aftermarket. And then last year we went through a reorganization. And so I was moved over lateral move, and I'll talk about lateral moves in a second, but lateral move, but I took on a different body of work. But now I have both developing the equipment as well as sustaining the equipment in the aftermarket. So it's comparable role, but just a different body of engines that I'm supporting. I say the reason why I pointed out the lateral move, though, because I think it's so important for people to know. I've taken multiple lateral moves in my time at Rolls-Royce, but they have all developed me in new and exciting ways that have set me up for success for those advancement and growth. So while I didn't do a linear straight up and down, I went and learned different parts of the business that put together a very well-rounded person to allow me to now lead my entire business division, because I have developed those different skill set
Yeah.
across the business.
That man, you said so much there, and it's so powerful. I love what you're saying about lateral moves, because I think as you get a little more senior in your career, you appreciate that sometimes it's not always straight up and down. It's not always a promotion. You're getting new skills to prepare you for what that next opportunity is. And sometimes that is a lateral move or a secondment or a this or that, a credential, go back to school and get some kind of information or experience that you don't have. I think that's very important. But what I'm really moved by is you talking about your vulnerability in having to expose your personal life to your business life, your professional life. And I think that's always a point of discomfort for many leaders, particularly many women leaders. But I know for sure that is particularly uncomfortable for people of color. We absolutely are taught You don't let everybody know what's going on in your home, in your house, for a multitude of reasons. And so being in the leadership position where that's just part of what has to happen, especially when you appreciate things aren't all perfect and tidy as you would want them to be. You're in a challenging position. Everybody's kids was struggling through COVID. I don't know anybody kids who were in the midst of COVID who just came out was like everything was fine. Everybody struggled. So have to have that on display and balance it and do all the things. I can really appreciate how challenging that was as a leader in a new city and trying to do all that. And so I want to double down on that just a bit. And you talked about, because I was going to say you had 3 promotions in 5 years. Maybe that wasn't the case. Maybe that was some of the lateral moves you mentioned. But regardless, we know, and like all of us, that there is a particular pushback, resistance to diversity, equity, and inclusion now in a way that it hasn't always been, or we've come full circle. And I think there's no question that particularly affects women and women of color in particular. And so you've given us a very colorful example of how that kind of vulnerability was on display when you were having all the people in your house in DC. I also want to know, how has that affected your, if at all, maybe not at all, your ascension into leadership through your opportunities at Rolls-Royce, but through your whole career? How has being a woman of color, particularly in the aerospace space field, my goodness, like not just engineering, but aerospace of all things, have you experienced any challenges, or have you experienced what sounds like is the possibility, even more advancement, even more elevation, because maybe you're such a unicorn in a place where there just are not that many of us? Tell us about that.
Yeah. I would say I've definitely experienced challenges, but for multitude of reasons. So I'm gonna give a couple examples. One, I already mentioned, I know you guys can't see me, but I already mentioned that I present younger than I am. And especially in my early days at Rolls, I presented like I had just graduated college,
Yeah.
right? And so no one knew I had a career before Rolls-Royce. No one knew that I had this kind of long-standing career in law and in economic development and venture capital. And so I come in and I seem like the most sharp professional person on earth for a 22-year-old if
Right.
I were 22. Right? Like, how does she know this? She's so mature. She's so astute. And I'm like, because I'm not 22.
Right.
But you think I am when you look at me. And on the one hand, that served me very well because in compared to my 22-year-old peers who weren't really my peers, but you think they're
Right.
my peers,
Right.
I, of course, do look a lot more polished and a lot more astute and mature. And so that made me stand apart from what you perceive to be my peer group. On the other hand, they're like, but you got plenty of time because they think I got a
Right.
whole career ahead of me to
Right.
learn and grow. So there's no problem to pass her up for opportunities because she's
Mm.
young and she has time and we'll continue to grow her and nurture her. So age absolutely came to play for me, even though I wasn't as young as people perceived. That thought that I'm young made it, we'll just put her in line. She's in line. When the next opportunity comes, she'll be next, but we don't have to take her right away because she has plenty of time.
Right.
So one of the things that I did to offset that was to dress very professional in every environment that I'm in so that people always took me seriously and always took me as a responsible professional. The other thing is being a single mom. For some reason, there's this misconception that because you're a single mom, your kids matter more to you or your obligation to your kids is matters more than if you are a two-parent household. And so things would come up like, "Oh, well, she can't travel because who's gonna watch your kid?" Well, you don't get to tell me what
Right.
my family arrangements are for my child. Let me decide if travel as a part of my role is gonna work for me or not. Now, if I come to you and say, "Hey, that doesn't work for me because that doesn't is not conducive to my home life," fine. But I have a very supportive home system. One of the reasons why I came back to Indiana is because of my very supportive home system. And so my kid was gonna be fine. However, there are two-parent households that equally would be disrupted if one or two of the parents had to travel and had to miss things because they're traveling away from their kids. Why are we not just asking that question generically? Why is that question specifically to Tiffany, the single mom?
Right.
So I would challenge that, the status quo of what it meant to be a single mom. I'm all about making accommodations when requested, but I'm not about holding people back or limiting their opportunities because you've made some kind of false misnomer in your own head as to what that person needs.
Absolutely.
So that was another challenge that I faced. I would say from a racial and gender perspective, early in my career, I did not face a lot of difficulty because I was just a hard worker and an overachiever and just always on the go. In fact, some person told me, one of my mentors told me, my ambition might exceed the opportunities available at this company, right? Like that's how much of a go getter I was in terms of really taking ownership of and drive over my career. It wasn't until I did start getting the promotions, not the lateral moves, but the promotions and what was perceived to be a short tenure within the company that the race and gender started to come to play. Coincidentally, that's also coincides with George Floyd and a lot of attention and focus around DE&I and those words used as negative words, and right? They were actually almost weapons that were thrown out like you couldn't get promoted if not for the fact that the DE&I was at play. And so people started to say it out loud to my face in email, in ethics complaints, etc., that the only reason I
Right.
had been promoted was because I was a Black female and there weren't that many Black female at the company. And that was really frustrating for me. It was really disheartening for me. I felt like I was being attacked and harassed. I felt like it couldn't be further from the truth. All the sacrifice that I had made to learn. I've completely made a pivot in my entire career to go learn other parts of the business just to get these type of opportunities. Most people would not have been willing to make those sacrifices. I moved my child halfway across the country to get new experiences and exposure. Most people would not do that.
You got 3 degrees. Most people don't have that.
I don't. And no one wanted to know any of that, right? It was just there's this Black female that all of a sudden has come into Rolls-Royce and grown into a senior vice president role. It has to be because she's a Black female.
Right.
Can't be for any other reason. And that was really hard for me. And at first I got defensive about it and started to get emotional about it. And then I just decided to take it as a badge of pride. Yes, I am a Black female in this role and there aren't a bunch of me around, but I'm going to hold my weight. Anybody who works with me or works for me knows that I'm more than capable to do my job. People seek me out trying to work on my team because they know what kind of leader I am and that I care about my people. I'm tough, but I'm fair, and we're going to get the job done at a high level and we're going to be rewarded accordingly. Other people in the company that look like me, whether it be because they're female, whether it because of they're Black or Black female, come seek me for mentorship and guidance, and I look forward to those opportunities. Even people who don't look like me seek for mentorship and guidance because I have a skill set that they want to attain or I've navigated my career in a way that they want to know, how were you able to do that? And I coach them. I spend a lot of time with our early career and our young people, our grads and our interns and early career folks, because I learn just as much from them as they learn from me, because this next generation comes into the workforce, their expectations of the workforce is much different than my expectation and definitely the older generations before me.
Sure.
And so that conversation and dialogue makes us both better. And so at this point, I have just taken it as a badge of honor that I am blessed to be in the role that I am and to be able to have the influence and the connections and the support system that I have, as well as be a support system to others so that 10 years from now, it's not just one or two of us. There's enough of us to go around where it's not such a big deal. And people aren't saying it must just be a DE&I hire.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so powerful, Tiffany. It's so powerful and it's so necessary. You're basically doubling down on what we've continued to talk about, which is a diverse person in any role of leadership is not exclusive of merit. There's no way we get to any role or position of authority or seniority without being damn good at what we do. It just doesn't happen. And the idea that people are hiring for anything less than excellence and exceptionalism and great leadership is just craziness. Who's doing that? I don't know anybody who's trying to win and make money and be successful who's hiring for suboptimal people. It's just not the case. So I appreciate you explaining that and sharing that. I appreciate you conveying and being transparent about the challenges that have come since George Floyd, because most of us thought George Floyd was an awakening of more equitable behavior. And what you're describing is some of the nastiness came out at that point too. And so I really appreciate that because I think it's real. And I think oftentimes, no matter what role or organization or position, people are shocked to hear how much pushback any diverse leader still gets, no matter how credentialed and how much experience and how much background. It makes no difference. Like at some point, for some people, there's not enough degrees you could ever have that would warrant you being in the position you are. And that's just the reality. So to your point, you just got to take it as a badge of honor, tap yourself on the back and keep on pushing. So thank you for sharing that because that's so real. So when you're talking about, you mentioned authenticity and transparency, and you've talked a lot about that. When those people, diverse and non-diverse, are now coming to you because you're a senior leader at Rolls and you obviously stand out, how do you give them permission to be their authentic selves and to carry themselves in a way that stays true to themselves, but still demonstrates excellence, still demonstrates that they also can lead, they also have value in the company? How do you convey that to others who seek your mentorship or guidance?
Yeah, thank you. I'm still on a journey of authenticity and transparency because, again, for so long in my life has it been entrenched in me, the separation of your personal life with your professional life. So I've gotten to a point where I feel like there's certain elements of my personal life that I can share in the professional way and still be authentic to who I am, but also live within my comfort zone of this is how much I'm willing to give.
Right.
And it keeps that goalpost keeps getting further and further, right? Like I continue to share more and more of myself, the more comfortable and confident I get in that. And the more I'm in a psychologically safe environment where it doesn't come back as a retaliatory effort against me, that makes me feel confident in the ability to do it. But where I think I've done it the best is when I'm leading teams or mentoring or coaching, and then that creates the opportunity for them to reciprocate. So, for example, things like having to commute your children. My daughter goes to private school. Having to commute her to and from school might mean that I can't take meetings at certain parts of the day because I have to go and pick her up or drop her off, and being very transparent about that. I can't take a 7:30 meeting because I have to drop my daughter off at 8 o'clock. So my next meeting won't be, I could take it earlier or later, but it won't be during that time because I'm doing car drop off. Do you know who the number one demographic of people who were most excited to hear me say that out loud? Men. Men who also were dropping their kids off to and from school or doing bus runs felt like, well, if she's saying she's doing it, maybe it's okay for me to say I can do it. And that unlocks potential for everybody,
Right.
not just that man to have the flexibility to be able to spend that time with the child and play that role, but also their spouse who now does have flexibility during that time because they're not the one always obligated to do the school run because I'm honoring that flexibility for my team. That was one example of a level of authenticity that I shared. Or maybe if my child is sick and I'm at home that day and I say, hey, I might have to go off camera sometimes because I have a sick child that I have to check in. That gave people the confidence to know that they could do that as well.
Yeah.
If I'm having a really bad day and I know it's that kind of day, the different decisions or difficult decisions or conversations have took me down a path of no return and I need to just put myself in timeout, I will let people know. Tiffany needs to put herself in timeout. This is a meeting we're probably going to have another day in order for me to be in the right headspace. Or I'll even bring the team together and say, let's just vent today because I know it's been that kind of day. Let me hear it. Safe space. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me how you're feeling. Tell me your frustrations. And I will equally share. Obviously, I always protect the integrity of things that as a senior leader, sometimes you can't share, but trying to create that space where the
Sure.
team feels like they can be open and honest and they know I have a high level of integrity. They know I have a high level of trust where if they're sharing with me, I'm not sharing it beyond that room or sharing it beyond the conversation that we're having, but I'm creating that space so that we can support one another and encourage one another and uplift one another, even in difficult times. And that vulnerability has really unlocked my relationship, not just with my team and the people I coach and mentor, with my peer group, even with my leadership chain, right? Having those very difficult conversations that you wouldn't otherwise have unless you establish that level of trust has been really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And it's not something we've talked about. We've talked about it a lot on the show, but not in those exact words. Having the psychological safety for people to feel like they can vent and be their authentic selves, for you as a leader to have a place where you can vent and feel like you can be your authentic self. I just left a women's event. It's Women's History Month, it's International Women's Day. And just being in those kind of spaces right now with women leaders, executives, just community leaders, people in the community, but particularly women. You don't appreciate how heavy things are necessarily until you get in a space where it's safe to vent that and discuss that and support each other through that, because we are just so built to push through, handle your business, get to the next thing. And then it's often like we're talking about with kids, raising kids. You don't realize until the kids are grown, like that was a hustle. It's hard work to raise kids. It's hard work to just push through day to day on a professional side when there's so much happening in society, in your personal life, whatever the case may be. And people do need spaces just to let that guard down and say, hey, we're all here. We're all in this together. And if today is not a good day, then let's just take some time. Everybody gets a timeout, right?
Yep.
I really appreciate that. That's so good. So as we begin to come to a close, I want you to think about, from your vantage point, your career learnings, what would you advise other business community leaders here in Indiana, and particularly Indianapolis, to do if and when they're not necessarily feeling armed or empowered by their organization's management to allow some of these safe spaces or to allow real discussions about what's actually happening in real life and how that may or may not affect their work life, their work considerations, their work product, how they show up, etc. Because I'm the space, I always believe we have to show up in excellence. I really don't give a lot of credence for that not being the case. But on the flip side, there does also have to be spaces where you just acknowledge today's not going to be that day. I'm not going to be my best self today. I'm just kind of letting you know that. How do you approach that? And more importantly, what would you advise other organizational leaders in this city, in this state, to do to allow for some of those safe spaces?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I would say is we tell our kids it's okay to make mistakes. We learn and grow from mistakes, but then in the workplace, we're less forgiving
Right.
for mistakes. Now, obviously, there's some mistakes that have dire consequences, especially when you talk about things that are illegal or unethical or harassment or violating a person's personal safety, et cetera. And those kinds of things, of course, there are consequences for that. But day to day, in and out, giving that freedom to people for people to not be their best selves for either reasons that are inside the workplace or even reasons that are outside of the workplace is really important.
Yeah.
Even if you can't personally relate, just understand that someone might be coming or going through something that's preventing them from being their best self, and creating space and asking questions and just spending the time to try to get to know people and understand the why. Like I said, I spent a lot of time with the early careers. I learned so much from young people. They teach me so much about what they want from the workforce. Some things are unrealistic, at least for right now, in terms of where we are in a business cycle,
Sure.
that some of those things you're just not going to get. But I'm telling you that. Like, if you want to do well here, this probably isn't the place for you if this is 100% core to your value system.
Right.
But if you do want to do well, here's how you navigate that despite having certain expectations or despite thinking that things are going to be a certain way. One of the things I hear oftentimes about young people in the workforce is that they're the ones who like the remote work the best. And I'm like, no. Young people are saying we want those connections because we don't otherwise have an ability to grow and to learn and to network. You guys need to make yourselves available to us in these remote and hybrid environments so we can establish those connections. That was huge learning for me because
Yeah.
now I have to be mindful about how my team is showing up to coach and develop and mentor others to make sure that they're getting that exposure. So spending time listening, learning, understanding, and I think we oftentimes think when people have different perspectives or different walks of life, we have to agree. It's not about agreeing. It's about understanding the perspective that person is coming from and creating an environment where that is their lived reality,
Right.
that is their perspective, and they can still show up and be at their best and do what they do well. So I think that's one thing I would say that you really should do is spend more time listening, not thinking that we know it all and have all the answers because this is the way I did it, so this is the way you should do it.
Right.
Get that mentality out and understand that people are going to have all different journeys to get to where they're going and just really spend the time listening. The other thing I would say is that I feel like with that psychological safety piece, I think people are so afraid, especially the DE&I just creates this mystified false sense of reality that is such a taboo word that they think that they're going to step on a legal landmine or is going to lead to some ethical complaint or harassment or something that they don't want to be a part of. So they're like, I'm just going to sit quiet and not say anything.
Yeah.
Well, then don't call it DEI. I don't care what you call it, but just recognize people are going to come from all walks of life. They're going to have a journey to get here that you might not know because the letters on the page of the resume are not going to tell you. Spend time getting to know that person. Spend time understanding what brings them out to make them at their best. Spend time understanding why they leave at 4 o'clock every day and not just make an assumption that they're lazy or
Yeah.
don't want to punch the weight. They might be checking back in at 8 o'clock and you don't even know because they have to pick up a child. Spend time trying to get to know what makes people tick, what makes them at their best, what's going to motivate them and encourage them to be at their best, and just have that understanding and acceptance that all styles get results. And the more you invest in pouring into those people and the things that they do well, the more likely they'll continue to exceed because they don't want to let you down because you would have been the person that has invested in them and that has encouraged them and uplifted them and supported them, that now they feel like they owe it to themselves and to you to make sure that they're
Right.
at their best.
Yeah. That is so powerful. I think you've dropped so many nuggets that are so important and from just a very unique vantage point, a very unique career path. I really want to thank you for sharing. And I'm going to end on this question, particularly since you are an Indiana native. What do you believe are some of the greatest advances Indiana companies have made as reflective in having a more inclusive workforce? And what tools, tips, or resources would you advise either organizational, corporate, business leaders to incorporate in order to continue growing an inclusive workforce, or people coming to Indiana or here in Indiana trying to be advance and excel in Indiana corporations?
Yeah, so one of the things I hear a lot about Indiana is it's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise a family. The schools are great. There's not a lot of traffic, great cost of living, and the opportunities that allow for you to live here and do well are really great and plentiful. I call Indianapolis a big town. Some people call it a small city. I call it a big town because it has that hospitality feel where lots of people know each other, communities get together and support one another, and that's really great. Where I think I've seen the shift most recently, I would say the past 10 years, is the focus on attracting and retaining the talent of young people to the city and creating an environment where they want to work, live, and play. I think COVID set us back a little bit in that because as people went to a more agile or remote work environment, there was less incentive for people to come back to the city
Yeah.
and invest in that. And I hope we pick that back up because I think the city needs it. I could see a lot of pockets of groups and young professional organizations popping up and having their own events and doing their own things and gathering. I could see just people taking interest in taking sight on what makes Indianapolis special, but then also wanting to come here. I think that's important for us to attract and retain our talent and making sure that we're bringing the best and the brightest of a diversity of all groups of people from all walks of life here, whether they're homegrown from Indiana and are coming back, or I mean, staying here, or whether they're from other places and are finding Indiana attractive. That would be the thing that I would say I would definitely encourage us to continue to double down on and see. In fact, even when we're recruiting our grads and early careers in at our company at Rolls, one of the first questions we get is, what is it like to live in Indiana? And so we talk about it. We talk about all the great things that Indianapolis has to offer, especially in the sporting space. People don't even realize we host as many sporting events and activities that we do. And so just really focusing on how we can continue to market Indianapolis to our young people and attract and retain talent. Because part of the ability to recruit diversity and inclusive environments is to make sure that you can retain them. And we need the state and the city's support to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's so true and it's so powerful. I have so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Tiffany. This has been really good, and we really appreciate you being our guest on this Women's History Month episode of the Freedom Forum. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Angela.
Thank you again to Tiffany Munsell, and thanks to you for joining us on this 44th episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Please come back next month for another conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Central Indiana business community.